Hello, hello, namaste, and welcome to another smashing episode of DLive.in podcast series. I'm Ira Sahay, your host for tonight, and I'm a metabolic health coach based out of Mumbai. I'm a member and the media head of DLive.in, India's oldest, largest, and the only award-winning low-carb platform. DLive.in was founded by Anup Singh, an engineer and a silver medalist from the distinguished IIT. Anup was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in 2011, and since then, he has been living a pill free life by first following an LCHF diet and now a carnivore diet. Based on the liver's glycogen holding capacity of 120 grams, Anup came up with the idea of limiting carbs to 100 grams per day on an Indian low carb diet for diabetes remission. He founded India's largest and the only award-winning low-carb platform, DLive.in, in 2014, which now has 3,000 plus combined success stories of diabetes and other metabolic diseases remission. DLive has since been reviewed by low-carb stalwarts like Dr. Gary Fetke, Dr. David Unwin, Professor Tim Noakes, and many more, who use the low-carb resources on DLive and its 1,200 plus original low-carb keto carnivore recipes for the Asian and Indian patients. Anup Singh, along with Shashikant Iyengar, was also the co-organizer of the recently concluded India's first low-carb conference that had 47 top global low-carb icons speaking at the event, including our very own Dr. Brian Lenzkes. Dr. Brian Lenzkes is an internal medicine doctor and runs his independent practice at San Diego, where he's also been voted as one of the top doctors. His own journey into low-carb started when he dropped 50 lbs of weight, and since then, he's been a proponent of low carb. Brian is also on the panel of experts on Diet Doctor and has many feathers on his cap. But what intrigues me most is the person that Brian is and his podcast, Life's Best Medicine, in which he talks about the larger meaning, significance of life, and why people do the things they do, what drives their motivation to achieve those things, and what makes life more meaningful. Brian is a man of great emotional depth with a lot of gratitude for life, as I've understood. Let's get to know the man behind the Brian Lenzkes that we all know. Brian, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. Such a kind introduction.
You
Thank you, Ira. I
deserve that.
appreciate it.
You deserve that. Brian, tell us who Brian really is as a person. What has he found in life that makes him so happy, cheerful, and smiling all the time?
Yeah, I think I've always looked at it in a way where you're gonna have to work. You might as well make the best of it, right? Do something you want to do, and if it gets bad enough, you jump out of that and go into something new and try to reinvent yourself. Sometimes I think a lot of us will complain and we stay in the more painful area of life. We don't like our boss, we don't like our job, but we stayed there for 30 years and you go, okay, what am I doing? So for me, I didn't grow up wanting to be a doctor. I had some experiences with doing volunteer work in Mexico, and I said, I like these doctors that I'm working with. They seem very nice. So I went into medicine, and then I started realizing in medicine a lot of times we're just putting band-aids on the problem. We're not really addressing the underlying stuff. So for me, I was working 18-hour days, highly stressed, very, and the clinic I was working at is the busiest in San Diego. And so everyone was on edge all the time. So I was working 18-hour days, getting up at 4 in the morning, trying to get a workout in, going to the hospital for 2 hours, then dealing with insurance companies for hours after that. And so I started even thinking, what am I doing? I'm not effective with patients. I can't, when you rush me and I have 10 minutes with a patient and they're knocking on my door every 10 minutes saying, hey, doctor, there's people waiting. You have to hurry. You got to be more efficient. So at that point, I was not really enjoying what I was doing. And I enjoyed my home life. And I was thinking, gosh, I'm working, 14 or 18-hour days and, have to sleep in that part. And I'm not home with my wife and kids. And, at some point you realize you're ineffective as a doctor. You're overworked, you're stressed, you're up late, at night you're thinking about, oh, I got to do my notes. And then you're trying to catch up. You can never catch up. And so it was like being on a treadmill that was too fast. And so at some point I said, you know what, I just can't. I don't want to practice this style of medicine. And if I have to compromise my values in helping patients in order to be more efficient, then it's not the job I want. And so that's when I jumped out in 2020 of all times to do my own practice outside the insurance model. So it's a direct primary care. So I have, yesterday I spent, an hour and 20 minutes with a patient, and so I can spend a lot more time and get to know them and say, what's going on in life, and really start to, and so even now, like you're asking, my neighbors notice a change. They'll say, they used to tease me. The old joke in my neighborhood was, that I never had to wash my car because I left in the dark and I came home in the dark. So they never saw my car during the day, so it could be dirty and no one would ever know it. But now, I get together with my neighbors and they would ask me like, "How's life different?" And I would say, "Ask my wife," and she would cry and say, "It's amazing." Because he's not stressed and tense and always preoccupied and in a hurry. You know how it is when you're really, really busy all the time. And that's why I have compassion for doctors. And that's why I'm happy because I love my patients and I love what I do and I'm seeing good outcomes. So, that's why, we were talking about before we started recording, Dr. Tro gets upset and can get very abrasive, but he's seen the disasters that happen with amputations and dialysis and blindness and, people committing suicide because they're in so much pain from their sugars out of control, bypass surgeries. And you think, gosh, if we can only intervene and help people. So that's why I'm happy, I think, because I see the fruit of what I've learned from Jason Fung and all the people that you mentioned, Gary Fettke, Tim Noakes, and I can pass that along to my patient, Ben Bickman, and so there's so many great people out there, and to be able to synthesize all these things and say, okay, let's get to the root cause, as Ivor Cummins would say, like, what's the root cause of what's going on? Why is it that we're eating too much? Why is it that we're not sleeping? Why is it we worry about every single ounce, And so sometimes you can get so caught up in the details that you miss the big picture.
Correct. Yeah, yeah. I think you've from that, as they typically say, that 9 to 5 switch that you work for all the time, and you are just caught up in that vicious cycle. But then at some point of time, you stop and add value to your life. You change the circle of it, and then I think everything changes with that. I think you found your ikigai also in your profession, if one can say that, something that you like to do. I
Yeah,
was going,
yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, please go ahead.
No, I was gonna say just yesterday I was thinking I get paid to do this, and I'm laughing with my patients, and we're having fun, and we're enjoying each other's company, and it's not this. I have patients. And this is true in the U.S. I don't know if it's true in India, but I have one patient. We just sat and talked for a while. I didn't have a pen in my hand. I wasn't typing, and he said, "You're my doctor for the rest of my life." And I said, "How do you don't even know me yet?" He said, "You're looking at me. You're talking to me." He said, "My old doctor for 5 years, all I know what the back of his head looks like because he was typing on the computer the whole time and saying, 'Oh yeah, your wife's leaving you.' Okay, yeah." Like there was no engagement with someone as a human being. So if we lose that in medicine, we've lost it all.
Mm-hmm. You said you wanted to always become a doctor, but had you not been a doctor, what is the second best thing that you would have been doing in life right now?
Yeah, honestly, I never really thought about being a doctor until I was in undergrad. I had good grades. I had, straight A's, and I was in the top of my class, and I worked hard because I knew, I didn't have the skills to be a professional football player or something like that. So, it would be interesting to see what I would do. It's hard for me to imagine now doing anything different. Now, when I was at my old practice, I could see like there was a lot of stuff I could do. And the joke was there's a restaurant called Rubio's here in San Diego. And when my kids were little, I was there. We were playing one day, and then I got called to the hospital on an emergency, so I had to leave. I said, "Oh, girls," I gave them a kiss. I'll go, "I'll be right back. You have to go to the hospital, but I'll be back in a few hours, and we'll keep playing." And my daughter looked at me and said, "How come you can't just work at Rubio's or something, Dad?" And you start realizing how much of a sacrifice it is to be a doctor, the times and the Christmas holidays and the, New Year's Eve and, someone's birthday and you have to be on call. And there's a lot that we miss in life from that. So yeah, I really haven't really considered what else I would do because, initially I was thinking I was going to go into physical therapy or something. I wanted to do something that would help people. So I could see myself doing, counseling or doing something like that other than being a doctor. But yeah, it's funny to think about it, and I love that. That's why I love talking to people on Life's Best Medicine because Jason Fung wanted to be a airplane, like make jet engines and things like that, and Ben Bickman was going to do something totally. Do you think, wow, whenever they would have done something different, how much humanity would have lost?
Yes. Brian, tell us something about your growing up years. Where did you grow up at? And what were the influences in your life at that point of time? How was your family and the people that left some impact on you while you were growing up?
Yeah, I think I had so many good mentors in life. My parents got divorced when I was 9. And so, my dad was away. He was building his business, working hard. I always kind of understood that. So it didn't affect me in a negative way. My mom was a hairdresser. So she worked hard and worked long hours. And so I was kind of a latchkey kid, they call it here in the US, where, you get off work and you go home and you watch TV and you eat cookies and, play with your friends. And so I had a really good upbringing. So weight was always an issue. Like my family, my mom's side of the family, I was just thinking about it yesterday. I said all my uncles were dead at my age,
Mm.
because of lifestyle choices, smoking, drinking alcohol, eating terrible foods, shooting insulin all the time. And I remember thinking, I don't want to end up like these guys. It's not good. So I played sports, and that was my outlet. Like in high school, I did athletics, I played football, and I wrestled and did things that, as a team. So I think that was a huge influence on me to realize, wrestling and football are a little different. Wrestling is just you. You can't blame someone else for messing up. It's you, and football was like you have a team effort. So you want to be a good part of the team. And so there's a lot of learning on that where you have to deal under pressure. You have to be able to handle adversity and injuries and things like that. So I think that was really uh a defining thing. So I had coaches who believed in me, and people who saw the potential you had even if you didn't have it yet. And so those were things that, and my dad was a great positive influence on me from that standpoint. My mom too. My mom is like, if you had to like pick the personality type, my mom is the one who would help anyone. She would give her couch away. It's like, Mom, you don't have a couch now. So, well, they needed it worse than I did. Or that she was that type of person. And my dad was always the glass, like the glass is always half full. Like
Yeah.
you see everything positive, it'll work out, don't worry, don't get stressed out. He was very, so I've adopted a lot of their, I learned that from them, even though they were divorced and they couldn't live together, and so there was a lot of things that I was taught at a young age that were so valuable. One of the things my dad taught me, or said to me, he said, you're better off sitting on the floor. Well, maybe I can't see it, maybe on the keto crowd here, but he said you're better off sitting on the floor and sharing a hot dog with your best friend than being in the best restaurant in the world by yourself. you
Yeah.
know and
Such a
so you
mean.
start seeing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just about integrity, that you don't steal, you do the right thing, you tell the truth. All those things were instilled in me, and when I look around at our society now, I realize a lot of people never had that, to say, hey, there's an impact of what you do.
Mm.
And I didn't grow up in a Christian family either. Like, we never went to church, and that wasn't my thing. As I got older, I started realizing the value of community and these, and how we need each other. It's really, it has become more clear to me. And being a doctor, we're faced with life and death every day.
Mm.
So you start thinking in those terms more. I go, okay, what really matters, right? That's why I started the podcast.
Right. Brian, tell us something about your family in terms of how you came into low carb and what were the impacts of people. As you said, your uncles were dead by this age, and how did that change you, or when did that shift happen into low carb for you personally?
Well, what happened was, I've struggled with weight, and going back to high school, I played football and I was short. So I had to gain a lot of weight to play football, in the defensive line. So I would gain weight in football season, eat whatever I wanted and work out really hard, lifting weights and get stronger and put on muscle mass. And then I'd have to lose 40 pounds for wrestling, so I
Mm.
would, like, starve yourself and do it the wrong way back then. But you're just, so you get into that cycle. So I figured, oh, you just messed up your metabolic, which is probably true to an extent, your metabolic rate. And then, you go through school and you gain weight, and you take a study break and have pizza. You just take a study break and, go out and have a drink or whatever it is. So we got so ingrained in that. And then during residency is the same thing. You don't know when you're going to eat again. So you eat all the time because you think you might go 4 hours without eating, or 8 hours or whatever. And so I started gaining weight, gaining weight, gaining weight. And then I had a patient come in and he had lost 40 pounds. I just saw him this week, as a matter of fact. And I looked at him, like, what happened? Like, first thing I think of as a doctor, if someone loses 40 pounds, you think they either have diabetes or cancer, especially because he's been overweight since I've known him. And he said,
Yeah.
no, I'm doing this thing called the fast diet. So he would fast 2 days a week, cut his carbohydrates those days. The other days he was eating whatever he wanted. He was drinking beer and eating pizza. And I'm like, how can this possibly be? It didn't make sense. So as I started researching, of course, one thing after another, you go down the rabbit hole. Because I didn't want to tell him what he's doing was dangerous, because I didn't know, and he was having benefits. So I'm like, let me look at this and at least see what he's doing. And then I come across Jason Fung, and then the whole world changed for me when I started realizing insulin resistance, high insulin levels. And when Jason, I reached out to him, and and this shows the people in the low carb community, he got right back to me, emailed me, texted me, then we started talking, and he explained a lot of this to me. And I thought, wow. He said, before someone gets diabetes, type 2 diabetes, I want to say, their insulin will be the highest it's ever been the day before they get diagnosed. And you go, how can that possibly be? And we're shooting insulin to get rid of the sugar, and we're not thinking, why are the sugar high? We need to give them insulin. Well, they already have a lot of insulin, And then you start realizing insulin resistance and the cells are full, like you were talking about, the liver fills up with sugar. Then what do? So I think that's what was my awakening. And I thought, and at that time I was the heaviest I ever was. I was doing the green shakes for breakfast, and I was doing the ADA's recommended diet. My sugars were in the pre-diet. I knew I was going to get diabetes. And I'm thinking, if I get diabetes, I'm going to end up like my uncles and my mom's family. My dad's family is pretty healthy, but my mom's family is disastrous. So that's when I started saying, I'm going to change it. What I'm doing is not working. I got to change a variable. And I was exercising the whole, I wasn't lazy. I worked out all the time, but I didn't get those results. But my wife would make one little dietary change and she would lose 20 pounds. I'm like, how does she do that? And she never really had weight struggles. And genetically, she has insulin sensitivity. So she can get away with way more than I can, put it that way.
Mm-hmm. You talked about insulin resistance. Why do you think, Brian, if it's such a common thing and that's the root cause of everything, why are doctors not talking about it? There's a lot of, I would say, bad advice out there.
Yeah, it's really hard to explain, because common sense, you could talk to a 12-year-old kid and go, okay, look, if your sugars are high, every time you eat sugars, your sugars go high. What should you do? Well, stop eating sugar. Okay. But doctors don't get that. They'll say, eat all the sugar you want and I'll give you insulin to make the sugar disappear, but it's not disappearing. You're shoving into the fat tissues, to the liver, to the kidneys, and all these other places where we get into trouble. So it's a mental block. And I think a lot of it is, it's a complicated thing, but a lot of it is pride. When you said, hey, never skip breakfast, I always told people, never skip breakfast, you're going to gain weight. Well, the data doesn't show. There was no data to say that, but everyone just starts saying stuff. So it becomes a threat to the system when you say, okay, let's check fasting insulin. There's a big, huge HMO in town, in the United States, and there about 40% of my patients are full-time. They're paying them full-time to be their patients. I had 2 consults from their medical group yesterday alone, because they're saying, these guys don't care about me. They got 8 minutes and they just keep putting me on more and more drugs, and they say be vegan or go on a liquid diet, and but they don't help me, and I'm getting worse and worse. And you can see when I get their records, I can see that they develop, and they wait till they get diabetes, then they say, okay, now we're going to do something. It's like, why don't you prevent it? It's like, you don't wait till you get cancer and then do a colonoscopy. You have to have preventive medicine. So I've offered, as a matter of fact, as an example of why this would be, I have a patient, she came to me, she lost 58 pounds, came off insulin, came off her blood pressure medicines, came off her mood medicines. She's doing absolutely stunning. She goes back to her doctor in this system, and the doctor looks at her and doesn't even say, hey, congratulations on your weight loss. What are you doing? There's no curiosity. The doctor said, oh, I'll change your med list. That was it. Like, wouldn't you be, like, when you see that, yeah, I would be worried about cancer and all these other things. But the fact, and so I reached out to the doctor and said, hey, I would love to, just for free. I said, it will cost me business because you guys are sending me patients without you knowing it. And I can teach you guys. I could teach your system and you can help your patients. And they said, well, no, thanks. We're not checking insulin. Okay. That's a huge risk factor, and you have to know what it is. And so for me, it's like, not knowing that information is critically important, and so it's a mental block, and doctors don't want to order tests that they don't know the results of. So doctors will refuse a coronary calcium score, or they'll refuse to do certain tests. And the patient says, I'll pay for it myself. And then the doctor's also thinking, if I order a test that's not standard, like insulin, sometimes they'll lose their bonus from their big HMOs. That's true. If you order unnecessary, they call it unnecessary testing. I got in trouble for that. Or they don't know what to do with it, or you can lose your bonuses if you order other stuff. They go, look, you're wasting resources. We're going to have to pay you less to cover that. So, and then they don't know what to do with the information. So it really is a lack of education. Doctors are stressed and overworked, so they don't want to look at alternative stuff. They go, oh, low carb, that's going to be gone in a year, so I'm not going to learn about it. Like, they don't invest and go, let me learn about it and say this, debunk it, or say, yeah, it's working. And so doctors, and plus you have 8 minutes with a patient. You don't have time to talk about, how are you going to talk about cutting insulin, watch your stress, all these things that we talk about. You can't do that in the standard system. And that's why we're getting patients coming outside the standards of care and saying, help me, I want to get healthier. And when you have a motivated patient, that's the most important thing you can have, right?
Mm-hmm. A lot of activism going on there on vegan, like veganism and stuff, Brian, what's your view on veganism before we move on to our, next section, which I, really want to talk about, which is life's best medicine. But just give me a view on veganism or a vegetarian diet in terms of the Indian way, if you know that, what it means. Indians who are vegetarians, a lot of them would not even eat eggs. and some are ovo-lacto-vegetarians. So in terms of perspective on how deficient it is or how good or bad it is, give us a throw a light on that.
Yeah, from my perspective is really I want to respect people's beliefs. So if you have a core belief that eating animals is wrong, then okay, there's going to be consequences, maybe health wise, but that's what you believe. And I can't say, no, you have to eat steak when you say, no, my religion says I can't. So you say, well, are there other ways around it? But as you're saying, my biggest concern is vegans not getting enough protein because muscle mass. If you look at all the data, if we throw everything else out and we go, okay, who lives the longest? The people with more muscle mass live longer. And I thought this was crazy when I heard that. I go, how can that possibly was muscle mass? Even if they smoke and drank and did bad stuff in their life, they live longer. Well, muscle is insulin sensitive. So the more muscle you have, the lower your insulin level is, right? So if you lose muscle mass, I have patients, Indian patients from India that change and they start adding in protein and cutting back on the non-bread and the rice and the mango, with sugar sauce on it and everything. And they have such dramatic improvements. It's amazing. Like I have a guy, it's incredible, like what he's done. And his A1C went from like 14, now he's running at 4.6 all the time by making those changes. And I said, are you eating, you don't eat meat for religious reasons or because of health? He goes, oh no, for health. And I go, well, let's look at your insulin's 38. You have all these things that are way out of whack. You're eating too many carbohydrates. We got to change that. And so when we first changed it, he did great. And then he went back to his old diet and he got full blown diabetes. And now he's low carb, working out, eating good protein, and he's able to put on muscle mass. So I think if you're vegetarian and you could have, cheese and meat, I'm sorry, cheese and eggs, you're going to be way better off, and even Health Code just came out with a vegan option for people who ethically don't want to have certain things. So, I think you have to, we could do anything, but I think one of the things that Sean Baker, who you had on, he's showing, and the data shows, if you don't have muscle mass, you're more likely to have osteoporosis with hip fractures, and all these things are debilitating. If you break a hip if you're a senior, you're in big trouble. And so if you're not having good muscle mass and you're not having good bone health, you're going to have some health problems down the road. And the biggest concern, and I've raised this, and I really try not to be judgmental, but it's my observation, is at least in the United States in my practice, my vegans were the most depressed, anxious, stressed, huge obesity rates, huge diabetes rates. And I was like, how can this and for me, I had to think about it. But here, it may be different than India because people here are eating Oreo cookies and Doritos and they're saying they're vegan. And it's like, that's not healthy. It's vegan, but it's not healthy. So there's a lot of that where people are eating, because you have to eat something. And if you're not eating protein and fat, what are you going to be eating? Carbohydrates. And so there's ramifications of that. So that's the big challenge. And I think you'll mostly be on a vegetarian diet and do very well, So I think we're learning a lot more, and that we had a lot of bad research that we were basing our recommendations on. And now you say, oh, we have to readdress this. And again, our biggest killer is diabetes and insulin resistance. That's contributing to cancers, contributing to everything we do, dementia, everything we worry about. And so you go, why would I not want to address the insulin issue, right? That's the elephant in the room, I think.
Mm. But, Sean and I have been on two podcasts together. I was invited over by him, and then I invited him to our D-Life podcast. And a lot of messaging that goes around religion in India. I had discussed this on his podcast, and we discussed this in great detail when I had him on mine. And you wouldn't believe, Brian, that the ancient Indian text of Ayurveda mentions meat as a medicament for most ailments. And on Sean's podcast, I had said, where have those texts gone, and who has made them disappear? So it's kind of a cultural sabotage that we don't know our heritage really. I mean, if you're talking about religion, tell me one source that tells you not to eat meat. I have a solid background in spirituality. I have been a tantra practitioner for 12 years and very rigorous practices. And I know for a fact, you would also may have read that there are animal sacrifices given at the temple to Shiva and Shakti. Please tell me, I mean, I'm dying to know from the people who are saying, it's a religious thing, maybe for some people out of some vow or one sect of people, but it cannot be a blanket statement for Hinduism, which has been a very liberal sort of, outlook and a religion. Animal sacrifices were given to deities and to Shiva. And nowhere is meat restricted. So I think this religious virtue signaling has as Ken Berry again was on my podcast, and he said it came largely from the British, times when they were the rulers, and that's the effect of a misrule, because you were fed the grain diet, which is a slave diet. So I think both counts. I mean, there are a lot of needs a lot of countering, actually, this religious thing, and meat has never been kind of barred or banned in Hinduism. There is a reason and there is evidence for that. Brian, tell
Absolutely, and
us.
we have the
Yeah,
same thing in the U.S., right? Around the world, there's religions who say you shouldn't eat meat, and it's like, where does that come from? And you're right, it's really about education. But if that person really believes that, you can either educate them and say, here's what, and even in medicine going back, if you look at our textbooks from the 1800s, which I have sitting on my bookshelf right here, what they do with people who had diabetes, they put them on a high fat ketogenic diet. They were putting them on, they would say, you eat mutton, you eat fatty meats, you eat butter. And they weren't telling them to go low. They weren't telling them to go low fat back then. And then everything changed when we got insulin. And you look at how everything changed after that. But you're right, it becomes a religion and people believe stuff. And the thing is having education where when people say, okay, let me go back to my old heritage and see. And if I'm having health consequences of that, I don't think God or anyone wants me to be sick and weak and feeble. Right. So you're right. You have to go back and look at the old teachings and say, wait a minute, we changed things in the 60s maybe or 70s. So yeah, I agree 100%.
yeah. I mean, if you're talking about meat being a sin, imagine offering meat diet to the gods. That's what we were doing culturally. So, I don't know where that came from.
And you also sacrifice what's the most important to you. You don't sacrifice something you don't care about. So the fact that they were offering that to God, saying, hey, we're giving you our best. We're not
Yeah.
giving you the weak, sick cow. We're giving you the healthiest of the cows. And, biblically going back was the same thing. They would have the fatted cow for their son, and that was how you showed your love. Absolutely.
This is the time of a lot of activism, I would say, Brian, and a lot of judicial activism as well is happening, and interfering with the religion. Now, the interference has resulted into the other extreme, where people think this is sin and therefore the court is interfering and the court is right. You're not ready to believe your ancient texts, which have been sabotaged, which you don't know about in the first place. So,
Well, yeah, not only
animal
that,
sacrifice. Yeah.
and I don't know how much is financial, how much. There was a doctor in India who was all over me, and I was actually trying to talk reason to him, and it went back and forth and back, and it just got very nasty, and actually, and so he was saying it's because of the meat that people are getting diabetes. I said, why is India, where in the territories where you don't eat any meat at all, how are they getting diabetes? And he blocked me. He won't talk to me anymore, right? Because
Exactly.
it's the
This is
point.
the, yeah, you're right. This is the line that I said at the Sean Baker podcast. You are calling yourself a largely vegetarian country, where a lot of people are not even eating eggs. People who are non-vegetarian are eating probably 3.7 kgs of meat per annum. And then you are the diabetes capital of the world. This needs some elaboration and some deliberation. You cannot
And
talk.
not only that is in the Silicon Valley area of the U.S. in San Francisco area. A lot of the tech leaders are from India. So they came over and they said, you can't do ghee and butter. We're going to have you do vegetable oil. Then they start having heart attacks,
Mm,
right? They weren't having heart attacks before eating the same stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of that and especially when you Westernize your diet and you start drinking soda and high sugar content foods as desserts more. So it does change for sure, depending where you're at. And, we notice that when I go to Guatemala and El Salvador and Vietnam, if people are out in the country, we don't see type 2 diabetes, right? In the city, we see it everywhere.
mm,
Why? It's because
mm.
out in the country, they're eating, they're thinner, they exercise more, but they're eating real food. They're not going to get packaged stuff. They have no access to it. So as we got closer and closer in the city, we'd be using a lot more diabetes medicines and obesity, hypertension medicines and mental illness medicines and all those things. You go, wow, yeah, there's definitely a correlation with that.
Mm. Brian, tell us something about your personal life and the influences and what makes you happy about your personal life.
I think I'm in a solid marriage. My wife, we met in high school. We get along great. I have two great kids who love me. I was teasing one of them the other day because I woke up in the morning and next to my nightstand there was a note. There's a dad, I love you and respect you and you're great. And all I'm thinking, I'm gonna go check my car and make sure she didn't run into my car on the way in, into the house. But that's what it is when you're around good people. I think and if you set that tone also, I think it really makes a huge difference. And I think it really does have to do with faith and outlook and saying, okay, no matter how bad things get, I've had some weird situations in my life, and I can look back and say, I mean, one thing that happened that really was faith building for me was at my old practice, which is a very busy, practice. Our office manager embezzled $500,000, and all of a sudden I thought, I have no income, right?
Mm.
And we couldn't say anything about it because the charges hadn't been filed, and so it was really a hard time to think, hey, everything's going well financially, and all of a sudden it gets pulled out from under you, and then what do you do? So my first call was at this meeting when we figured it out, and I kind of instigated this because I said our numbers aren't matching up. So we had pension that we had to fund and all this money that was supposed to be there that was gone. And you go, uh-oh, now what? But I called my wife and said, hey, look, we got troubles, so let's right now get rid of cable, get rid of anything that we don't need, get rid of, right? So my kids were in like music lessons. So she called the music coach. His wife is actually my office manager now, but she called him and said, hey, we have to cancel all of our meetings like going forward. And he said, why? And she said, are you mad at me? And she said, no, here's what happened. He said, I'll do it for free. I love you guys. Our school said the same thing. We'll do it for free. I got home that day, and my neighbor was standing in the driveway with his checkbook. He said, Brian, how much money do you need to get through? Right. And luckily I never had to take people up on these things, but just knowing that was such a huge lesson in my life about, that people care and they want to help and they want to do the right thing. And even when you go through these dramas and trauma, and we've all been through this for the last 3 years, and that's why I started the podcast to say people need to have some hope, to say it's going to get better, because so many people say it's never going to get better. And then what happened? Our suicide rate went up, our obesity rate went up, our drug abuse rate, everything got worse when you take away hope. So that's what Dr. Unwin gives people. And that's what I want to do, is give people hope, at least say, okay, let me take a breath, and I've been on medical trips where I've had machine guns pointed at me, and you go, okay, I got through it. What do you do? There's nothing you could really do if you're in a weird situation like that. So you have to rely on what really matters.
Mm-hmm. You said you were not raised religious, Brian. How did you come into religion? Who introduced you? And what part does religion and faith play in your practice as a doctor?
Oh gosh, I could tell you 2 hours worth of stories, but really what happened to me is my wife and I were, at that time, we were dating, and we were young kids and we'd fight and dumb things, and she was a believer and I wasn't. So I would look at her and go, I don't want to go. I want to go to a party. I don't want to go to some, church meeting. And so over time, what happened is that we grew apart and we break up. And then during that time, I got surrounded by Christians everywhere. Like at work, when I was out here, people would talk to me. One of my best friends went away to the Persian Gulf War, and in high school, he was a drinker, and I had to, he was like my tro back then. Someone I go, hey, relax, don't drink too much, don't do this, don't, be nice to people, all these things. And then he goes off to the military and has a near-death experience, and he becomes a Christian. Now he comes back, he's a pastor. Now he's evangelizing me, and I'm like, look, man, I really don't want to hear it. I mean, it's great, it worked for you, cool, that kind of thing. And I was the intellect. So he would say, we worked together. So he said, let me just do a Bible study with you. I'm like, okay. And I would read it just to annoy him and ask him questions. What about this? I would find loopholes that didn't make sense. And I go, what about this? What about that? And he would say, I don't know the answer, but I'll get you the answer. I'll come back. And he was very kind and very patient. He wasn't forcing it on me. And then what happened is, throughout my life, this would happen. So at that point, I was single, and my cousin lived in San Diego, and they grew up in a Christian house their whole life, and they were going snowboarding. And I said, I'll go. It'll be fun. Maybe I'll meet a girl. Maybe I'll have a good time. And what happened is, we were leaving the church, and we're driving in the middle of the desert. They were in the middle of nowhere, and the church van broke down. They got a flat tire, and the head guy was a pastor, and and I look and I was like, you don't have a spare tire? And they said, no, like someone used the spare tire and they didn't put a new one on there. And the guy said, let's pray. I'm like, we got to fix the car. We don't have time to pray. So they all stand in a circle, they hold hands and they pray about it. And and as soon as they were done praying, me being the scientist, I looked down and said, well, the tire's still flat. What are we going to do now? Right? It didn't work. And all of a sudden, there's one car coming down the freeway. He pulls in behind us, gets off, and he says, what's the problem? And I said, well, we got a flat tire. And the guy says, oh, you know what? I happen to own the tire shop on this exit. And right, he goes, I own the tire shop. Let me make you guys some coffee. He said, I never come in on Sunday, but I had to come in to get some paperwork that I had to finish by Monday morning. He said, oh, and he was such a nice guy and so kind and all that stuff. And he fixed our tire. He said, I can't charge you guys. Have fun, enjoy your trip, but it's a blessing for me to help you. And I was like, wow. So in my life, I've had so many experiences like that where I said, well, there's something to this, and all those people were so kind and nice and, all that. And then my life changed. I said, okay, I can't just live for myself and, going to parties and drinking and doing all this stuff. And then independently, I give my life to God and I say, okay, I'm going to live my life in a good way, and I want to follow religion I believe.
Mm.
And a few months later, who's my wife now calls me and said, I've been meaning to reach out to you. I had a feeling I should call you and just make amends of stuff. And we start dating again, and the rest is history. We've been happily married since then. So there's been a lot of that, and just doing medical trips and seeing the kindness of good people out there doing good things with nothing to get back. And that was, for me, the big thing was, how do you see a life change? I've seen people that were drug dealers, now all of a sudden they're helping everyone in the community. It's like, how does that happen? It's how you don't just see that, you don't change your character of who you are. So when I saw things like that, I said, well, I want to be that kind of influence. I want to be able to positive influence and help people and do the right thing as much as possible. None of us are perfect, but so that was really what I just kept seeing, good things happening to people who are doing the right stuff.
Mm. But being a science man, science-based, background, how do you bridge the gap between something that is replicable as an evidence or result with something which cannot be measured, which is another dimension of life, which you call faith, God, stuff like
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, and that's the thing, and I love it. As a matter of fact, anyone listening, I don't get paid more people listen, but I just released one with Life's Best Medicine with a friend who's atheist. He doesn't believe in God at all, and we get along great, and we have different views of things, and it's the same thing. And we both saw craziness happening over the last 3 years from a different perspective, but you can't lose your critical thinking. So in religion, you still can't lose your critical thinking.
Mm.
So, and for instance, at the Bible, if I see something different than what I think God's nature is based on what I'm reading, I say that doesn't make sense to me. God wouldn't want you to go kill all these people for no reason, or God wouldn't want you to, cheat on your wife. God wouldn't want these things, and people justify it through religion. So I don't think it's that you have to. I think a lot of us have faith that that you can't justify, right? For instance, I was telling my atheist friend, I said, if I'm driving in the middle of the desert and I see a truck sitting there,
Mm.
I don't think that just randomly happened. I don't think a truck you can get, the wind blows a certain way and the rock hits a piece of sand and all of a sudden now you have a truck. And if we can't imagine that happening, because I know if a truck is sitting in the middle of the desert, it doesn't get more defined, it gets less defined. It will break down and rust and fall apart. It doesn't come together. So how can a human body and the brain and the mind and knowing how everything works, it's hard to imagine that just happens by chance. It just doesn't make sense to me. And I think, okay, where do we have evidence of two pieces of dirt or lightning hit something and water comes together and now you have life? So for me, I can't logically make that sense. And for him, he's saying, well, how can you logically think that, some being just created the earth? And I go, yeah, they're both hard. There's things we don't understand, and that's why it's faith, because you can't prove it to be true. So I can't prove faith to you. But the reason I started the Life's Best Medicine, I was like, okay, here's Jose's story. Explain it to me. Explain how all these people come in your life. And he was even explaining that his neighbor that he's helped has helped him immensely. And he had no intention that she would be helping him, but he was just being kind and decent to her. And it turns out she had legal knowledge that would help him in starting his business. So there's so much of that. And I think as we all come across each other, we all take good from each other. And I think all religions have good and bad. There's no question about it. There's a fanatical group who's going to cause problems, right? There's Christians who are going to shoot doctors who do abortions, and other people are going to say, hey, look, here's what I believe. And I'm going to try to respect your rights as much as I can and what you believe. So that's why the dietary stuff it has become a religion for people, right? So many things have become, global warming has become a religion for some people. So I think it's really saying, okay, let me just look back and see what there's science behind all these things too. And some of the greatest scientists in the world have faith. Some of the greatest doctors I know have faith, and maybe that faith moves them forward in order to help humanity.
Dr. Ben Bickman on your podcast, and I remember him saying, "Science cannot answer why; it can only answer how and when." So I think
Absolutely.
the biggest people around us are deeply rooted in faith as well. I mean, you cannot dismiss that dimension of your life, or the larger dimension that you cannot see. As they say, there are three dimensions: something that is there and we know of it, something which may be there and we don't know of it, something which is there and we may never know of it. These are the three dimensions. I mean, you are, and scientifically speaking, when you talk about why things happen the way they happen, or there's a very strong belief in Hindu religion, which is called karma, and karma is now a global word, and children dying and stuff like that. There was a question in the Bhagavad Gita. by the great warrior Arjun. And he asks Krishna, and that's how the Bhagavad Gita was created. He asks Krishna, "Oh, I am totally distressed by, the number of people dying who are innocent. What is their fault? I mean, they were just born, and small children dying." And Krishna answers, which is a very, very, kind of things happen for a reason kind of answer. He says, "You don't know what kind of lives they have led before they came into this body. There have been many lifetimes, and the sins that, or the karma that they created, was so ripe, and the time for them to come in the body and go was just perfect. So don't ever think that there are accidents in the world. There's nothing by chance that's happening here. Even if you're meeting somebody, parting with somebody, it's all pre-planned. And that's what you call karma. The karma of the universe can never be faulty, can never be wrong. And there will not be a single person who will be punished by that entity, which we call God, for no reason at all. And I think Ben Beckman's podcast with you was quite on a similar line. He's a very, very religious person and a man of faith. And that's what he said. So yeah, I think you're right. What's the reason behind starting Life's Best Medicine podcast, Brian?
Well, it really happened, and it's kind of the irony of the world sometimes. We were on the low carb MD podcast, and we talk about low carb, right? So I would start talking about it would be a recurrent thing where people would come in and go, "How did you, when you were 400 pounds, all of a sudden say, I got to change my life?" And so many people, as a religious foundation, they go, "God told me," or "I had his voice saying, get up and you're not over," or whatever it was. And so people would send hate letters and get upset. Like, "Why are you talking about that? We want to talk about low carb." Well, that was their motivation to make the life change. So really what happened is during COVID, when everything was locked down and people couldn't go outside and it was really a hard time and people were depressed and anxious, all I tweeted was, "Keep the hope, keep the faith, things will get better." That's all I said. And for 3 days on social media, I got attacked by every atheist in the world, right? And I'm like, not every atheist, but it seemed like it. And I was
Mm,
like, this is craziness. And the guy who I just had on he goes, "Hey, don't attack this guy." Because they're like, "It will never get better. It's always going to be like this. This is our new life." It's like, well, if you
mm,
lose hope, I think for me, and when we talk about hell, I think losing hope is hell, right?
mm,
People kill themselves because they have no other way out and they have no hope and life's never going to get better. But if you go, "Hey, it's bad now, but let's just keep going, keep walking," and then because otherwise, if someone's 450, for me, I look at people. One of my patients, he couldn't weigh himself for 8 months. He worked hard for 8 months. He couldn't even weigh himself because he was over the weight of the scale. So once he could weigh himself, even though he was 496 pounds, he was like, "Oh my gosh," so happy because he could weigh himself. Like his perspective was, "Oh my gosh." But other people, if they're 496 pounds, they go, "What's the use? I'm never going to be able to lose weight. It's never going to happen." And when you get that mentality that you're never going to get better, it's never going to be, I don't like that mentality. I can't help that person. So and I was shocked that by talking about hope and faith that people would get upset because it's positive. It's not negative. I'm not saying, don't live in fear. Like fear is a killer. It is. We know it is. We know from a physiologic standpoint, there's no question about it.
mm,
And so then I said, the atheist was that, and he goes, "Prove." And he was getting into like kind of like you said, from a scientific method, saying this is all fantasy. You can't prove what you're saying. Oh, it wouldn't be faith if I could prove. I can't prove it to you. It's just like you have an experience and you feel it, and you know what's right, and you know when you connect with someone, and you know when you have a good feeling. And so this guy who I just interviewed was one who came to my defense, said, "Guys, leave him alone. Like you don't know the truth either. You don't know that you're 100% right. No one knows they're 100% right, or it
mm,
wouldn't be faith. If it's
mm,
100% proven, then you don't need faith anymore, right?" So that's why I said, well, let me tell you stories of people I've seen. Let me tell you about my guy that was an MS-13, the head of MS-13 in Guatemala. Now he's a clown helping people, right? How does
mm.
that happen? It
Yeah.
was a religious change. People who've done so many things, they have a change of heart and they go, "Look, I gotta, you know, whether you call it karma, whether you call it the golden rule, whatever you want to call it, I think what you throw into the world comes back to you. Some people are negative and nasty, and other people, like you asked me why I smile. Most of the time on the street, I'll smile at someone and say hi, and they'll say it back. But if I don't say it, they're not going to say it to me first. And so other people you see and you make human connections with, and there's so much of that we lost that human connection, or be able to say, "Okay, here's what you believe from a religious standpoint. Here's what I believe. How do we get along still? How do we make it where we could both coexist and be reasonable, and not say, I don't want to give you a platform because I don't like what you're saying. You're going to lead people the wrong way." And that's what's happened in medicine. That's what happened in life. In the US, I have families that I just did something on Twitter, and there's families who have no one's talked to each other for the last 3 years because someone said, "You're not vaxxed," or "You are vaxxed," or "You did this," or "You did," and like they're not going to have reconciliation. No one's like, they're missing out on enjoying each other's grandkids growing up and all these things. And you're separating yourself because someone voted different than you or whatever it is. So I like to be able to have people who voted differently than me that I can talk to and go, why did you vote that way? Why do you believe that? What's your, and you go, oh, okay, I can understand. Because if I talk to you, I can understand. But if I just alienate you and say you're an idiot, then I can never learn from you. So there's people who I totally disagreed with. And the more I listen to them and go, oh, that's a good point. I never thought about it that way. Okay, I get it where you're coming from. You know what I mean? So it just helps. If some people say you have to be carnivore, some people you have to be keto. It's like, what works for you? Is it working? Okay, great. Is your religion working for you? Great. If you're bitter and hate the world and you're sad and depressed and you don't like people, then maybe you got to look at a different approach to life or a different mindset, maybe.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Actually, I think we are holding up a lot. I mean, that's one reason we are not even able to smile, letting things go, letting things be, letting people be. And I think we are holding up a lot within us. And that's, I think we are just, up against our own selves in a lot of ways. And that's stopping us from being really happy and smiley. And that's where I think you have kind of crossed the line and went over to the other side and discovered more happiness.
Yeah, I think doing the best with what you got, I mean, so, like one of my friends said, he said, you can't take a basset hound. You know what a basset hound is? It's just a little dog. You can't put him on a treadmill and then all of a sudden he becomes a greyhound, which is a skinny athletic dog, right? But they could be the best basset hound they can. So some of us have this unreal, like, I'm not going to be Sean Baker, right? I'm not going to be Sean, I'm not going to grow 3 feet. And, so you start realizing who you are and say, okay, what are my skill sets? Because we all have unique skill sets or a unique way of approaching life that we can help other people. And maybe they just take a little piece of what you're saying. So I think that's what's so important, is being able to like listen to other people and not automatically say you're wrong. Say, why do you believe that? And let me just reassess it with my life experience and see if it's true or not, and I think that's what we really, that makes society a lot better, because I have a lot of friends who have absolutely different views than me and I love them.
Mm-hmm. Brian, tell us some incident from your life, that one incident that really changed you as a person. It could be a belief, it could be faith, it could be some, family incident that you remember, which probably left a very lasting impression, created the biggest impact in your mind, heart, and soul as a person.
Man, there have been so many. There have been so many of people that I go, wow, that is important life lessons. I think I can't say that I have one that was like the dominant one that totally changed the course of my life. Other than that, then just having all these people that were good people that were coming to my life. But I had so many experiences doing volunteer work in Guatemala and El Salvador. I think probably one of the biggest thing is really appreciating life. I think appreciating life, and I've had one experience I'll tell you. I talked about on the podcast too. There's several, but one is I was in the ICU one night and I was so busy, and it was like one of those nights you just cannot believe, like everyone's bleeding out and you're putting in lines and putting ventilators on people and you're doing all this stuff. So we're running around like crazy all night. And I kept getting pages on back then we had a pager, and the surgical intensive care unit, they paged me like 4 times. And I was like, guys, I'll call you right back. I'm so sorry. I'm in the middle of a code right now. I got so much going on. So the point was this guy was in there and he was refusing to put on his oxygen. And so the nurses were all upset. And they go, he won't put on his oxygen. I'm like, this guy's a jerk. Let me just go talk. I'll just go talk to him and say, hey, look. So I go over there. I go, hey, look, I don't want to be rude, but I have so much going on next door, and I have to come over and talk to you because you're not following what the nurse's orders are. And why is it that you don't want to put your oxygen on? And he looked at me and he said, I said, you could die if you don't wear your oxygen. He goes, son, look, while he's breathing hard, he said, I have incurable lung disease. I have this cancer. I have these things. I lost my wife a year ago. He said, I'm ready to go home to be with God. I'm at peace. Can you let an old man just be at peace? He said, I'm not trying to be rude or disrespectful, but so I put the oxygen on tonight. What happens tomorrow? I've been to the hospital 22 times in the last year. He just went through his whole story. And he said, I know where I'm going to go. I'm not worried. Can you just let me not put the oxygen on? And he was dead the next morning. Right. So you go, patient autonomy, being able to say, hey, look, I don't want to force my views on you. And so at some point you say, you're a human being and I'm going to respect your decisions. And so I think I've had, as a doctor, I've seen a lot of experiences like that. And one other one that changed me too, there's several, but one that really changed me was I was at USC And a guy came in, he had tattoos all over his body. And the first thing you can notice, he had a big swastika on his arm, right? That German Nazi sign. And you could tell he had a rough life and he was a disaster. I mean, he was in a really bad accident. And my attending physician was Jewish. And so you could tell he did not like this guy and he wasn't really invested in this guy's care. So the guy ultimately survives. And the first thing he said when he woke up and said, I know you guys saw my tattoos. I'm ashamed of that. That was my old life. I'm not like that. I've been saving money to get rid of this. And you realize we judged him, you judged him based on his past instead of saying, okay, where are you at now? And I think that, and there's so many people that I've judged, and then you hear their story and go, oh my gosh, I get it. Well, at the same time, a week later, this young girl, it was a horrific experience for me, is that I was working with the trauma service. The young girl got thrown out of a car. The car rolled over, crushed her, and we were trying everything, and she had bled. It was a disaster situation. I was filled with so much anger because I knew we couldn't save her because the damage was so bad. And then I had anger towards her father. I said, how do you have a beautiful girl like that not seatbelted in? Like that's on the dad. And he went on, and the story was that he was going off a turn and it was raining and they went off the road and flipped over. And then she was the only one not in a seatbelt. When I talked to the mom, I found out she was wearing a seatbelt the entire time. She took the seatbelt off to reach back in the back and to get something. The car flipped over at the same time. And that's what happened. And so I sat down with the dad and just hugged him and we cried together, and someone I had anger for, all of a sudden I had compassion, and because it was horrific. He was taking his family to Disneyland, right? He loved his family, and this was a horrific thing. So am I going to put more hate on this poor guy who, his whole life is devastated right now? So those kind of things, you start realizing, like, okay, let's not judge too quickly. Let's sit back and assess the big situation, understand the whole picture before we react.
Mm-hmm. Such a conflicting world, Brian. I think as a thought, where governments are supposed to, protect the republic and its people, we are seeing more inflation, taxation, and wars. Where schools are supposed to nurture curiosity and a scientific temper, or even a creative temper, we are seeing, kind of distressed adolescents all around. Look at the dietary associations that are supposed to give you guidelines. I mean, they are giving all the bad advice that you can get. Why do you think, as a society, as the collective conscience of humans, we are failing on so many levels? I mean, every aspect that you look at, it's kind of underperforming. How can we change that? What is going wrong in our lives?
Yeah, we have so much. I think there's so many factors involved. In medicine, what happened is doctors say, well, these governing bodies know better than we do, so we're just going to do what they say. And when you say, well, what they're doing is not working, our life expectancy is dropping, our infant mortality is going up, everything's going the wrong way. And so I just tweeted something about that the other day. I said, if the FAA, which controls air flights, if we're having flights crash all the time, you don't deny it's happening. You say, look, here's what's happening. How do we fix this? Until you have a change at the top, when you look at the American Diabetes Association, on this side, they're funded by big pharma, this side, big food. So the big pharma is saying, eat whatever you want, and we can fix you with drugs. And they're saying, hey, eat our food, and then they could fix you with drugs. So then you say, well, who's the advocate for the patient? So that's why, I step back. I mean, for me as a doctor practicing for 20 years, when I saw Professor Noakes going through trial and Gary Fettke for saying, don't eat sugary foods, don't eat cereal, you go, why would that be? Because they're a threat to the system. It's not that it's dangerous not to eat Pop-Tarts. It's not dangerous. They're not going to hurt someone by not eating processed garbage food. But what it hurts is industry. So what happens is you have these industries that are captured. We see it with the CDC and the FDA. They approve drugs, and then a year later, they go work for the drug company with a drug that they approve and getting paid 10 times more than they were at the other organization. And you look at it and go, is this a coincidence? It's not a coincidence. This is what's happening. So there's a lot of corruption, and I think there's a lot of uneducated people out there as far as doctors. Like, we start out with the question of why don't we check an insulin on everyone? If you look at the risk of cardiovascular disease, heart attack, strokes, dementia, Parkinson's, you go through the list of everything we're treating, you go, well, if we treat the insulin, maybe we don't have to have 30 drugs to treat all these other conditions, right? So that's the problem. And when you start saying that, Dave Feldman, for instance, is now saying, hey, maybe the cholesterol isn't as big of a problem as we did. Here's, look, in healthy people, does it make that much of a difference? So I think when you're a threat to the system, you come under attack. And trust me, Tro and I have come under attack for that, for saying, hey, look, here's what we're seeing clinically. As a matter of fact, one of the biggest attacks I've ever had was when I said, this is kind of weird. My patients, when we're treating them for obesity, diabetes, all of a sudden their mood gets better. And it's not because they lost weight already. They start getting happier and they have a better outcome. And I see them change and I see them singing and I see them happy. And I was like, this is weird. And addictions go down and drug addiction. And it all makes sense from a physiologic standpoint now. But a few years ago when we were noticing that, we got shut down and a doctor said we should lose our licenses for saying that nutrition has anything to do with mood. Now you have Chris Palmer, you have Georgia Ede, you have all these people with data saying, yeah, we're seeing it from our standpoint. So that's the things when we say, okay, cancers get better, this gets better. So why would you fight this? Why would you fight it if your patient's getting better? And all the time, I had 2 patients yesterday, the same thing. They said they've lost weight, they feel great, their mood's better, their energy is great, and their doctors tell them, you're killing yourself, you can't do this anymore. It's like, but I feel great, and my autoimmune problems are better, and all these things. And so they just want someone that they're not going to have to argue with every time they go in. So it's nice to have someone who's like-minded that says, oh, here's why your cholesterol, let me explain to you. But they don't explain to me. They just go, you need this drug and the statin drug and no blood pressure. Like your blood pressure is normal and your A1C is normal. You're not you're not in the diabetic range. So it's really it's a hard thing. And I think the other thing is doctors aren't good at taking medicines away. We're good at adding and adding and adding. We're afraid if we take something away, something's going to happen, then we're going to get blamed. So it's a systemic problem, and there's greed and there's corruption and there's evil and there's control and there's all these things that you don't want to believe, because us good people, we can't imagine that people would do things just to harm other people to make a few bucks or to get another award or whatever it is. So it's a hard thing for us to, in medicine, we went into medicine to help people. And that's why doctors are the number 2, suicide rate in the United States. Why? Because they're not doing what they want to do. They went there to help people. They want to wear their white coat and have their stethoscope and their patients get better. When they see people getting amputations and depressed and committing suicide, it takes a mental toll on you. Yeah. And for me, that's what I mean. I had to get out of a system and select for people who are motivated, where people say, look, I want to get better, help me, and I'll do what you say. Right. I don't go to an accountant, they tell me what to do, and then I invest in all the wrong things. I listen to my expert and say, let's do it together. If I lose all my money, then I'm going to go with another accountant. I'm not going to be with you. And I think there has to be a natural selection for doctors, where if the doctor's not helping you, you have to go to another doctor who cares about you. And they're not doing an intervention on you because they get a bonus for that. That's a conflict of interest, and that should not be allowed in medicine. We have so much of that's happening that people don't realize. It is really amazing. And as an example of that, to say, why would that be? When I resigned from my position at my old, I was making a lot of money. And when I resigned, the head guy who I trained with called me and he said, Brian, what's going on? Are you going through a midlife crisis? You're crazy. You have a set career the rest of your life. You're never going to have financial issues. And I said, look, I'm ordering insulin levels. I'm doing this. I'm preventing. I said, do you know how much money I'm saving your system? Because my patients, at that time, I think I had 32 people that came off insulin. It was ridiculous. And I go, those people came off insulin. We know the number 1 cause of heart attack, strokes, dialysis, all these things. And I said, do you know how much money I'm saving your system? And then you're not compensating me for that, right? Because if I work an hour, you pay me for an 8-minute visit, but I spend an hour because I can help that patient, because I want to help that patient. That's taking time away from my family every night. So I'm going to burn out because I can't work 18-hour days when you're not paying me for that. So anyways, he said, you're costing us money. And I said, how can that possibly be? He said, well, because the government gives us more money, the more sick the patient gets. So if you reverse their diabetes or you prevent them from getting it, we don't get paid as much. So we lose money. I was like, don't you see that as a conflict of interest? The sicker my patient gets, the more I get paid. Is that like the more times your car breaks down, you pay the mechanic more? No, you pay the mechanic to keep your car running. So that's what we lost. We lost this idea of, hey, we can help people and we can reverse disease or put it in remission, however you want to call it. And when you can do that, you go, why would we not do that with everyone? If it was my mom, what would I want? And when we see the outcomes, and that's why D-Life is so important, because the only way you can change the standard of care is by having a better standard, right? If the standard of care, everyone dies, you go, okay, this isn't a good treatment. Let's get something better where we're not suffering and dying. And so when you do that, you're a threat to the system is what it comes down to.
Yeah, that's what we see every day. Brian, when I think when Anup started in 2014, Anup started DLife.in, there was not much information on low carb, and especially in India, and the kind of diet that we have, where you could not even include eggs, or it's a whole plethora of variations that you have in every state and every mile maybe. So some people are only eating grains and plants. Some people are only eating the dairy with the vegetarian diet. Some people are adding eggs. The non-vegetarians are really not non-vegetarians as well. It is a very complex scenario, and coming up with that template of 100-gram carbs in a low-carb Indian diet was kind of standardizing a template that would work for diabetes in India. That's a very complicated and a complex thing to do in India. So I think when you work against the mainstream, and he had to face a lot of opposition when he started D Life, and I think it's the same everywhere. How do you deal?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would say much respect to those guys, Shashi and Anup. I saw the tax they took, and I was like, wow, I never had a tax like that. I had nasty stuff or whatever, but not like that, where it was like death threats and crazy. Like I was looking like, I'm glad I'm not in India right now, because I'd be like fearing for my life. I mean, it's
Mm,
amazing what these guys did and what you've developed and how many people you're helping. Because at some point, and that's what I mean, it's that nature, and that's what I see in the low carb community. All these leaders are saying, hey, look, Gary Fedke. I mean, all they had to do was say, you know what? Like Gary Fedke, they said, if you don't talk about cereal, you can do whatever you want in your clinic and we won't bug you. Right.
mm,
And he said, no, I'm going to talk about it because I can help more people. And so I started realizing, and that's what I realized with low carb MD. I had way more reach with my podcast than I ever did as a doctor in the office, because
mm,
so many people are getting it. Like you're talking about thousands of people that you're seeing in India, that have their story and their testimony. So they come after you and you go, okay, what about this person? What about this person? What about this person? They all got better. The
mhm.
standard of care is wrong. So if you're outside the standard of care, that sets you up for legal ramifications. So once the standard of care changes, then like now we're seeing the ADA, different places are adopting what we've been saying all along, because you can't deny it. The truth cannot be denied forever. At some point you go, look, I have better outcomes than you do. That's just the
Yeah.
bottom line.
Correct,
But now
correct.
they're saying, oh, the new drug's going to come. That's going to cure everyone. All those new drugs have problems, you
Mm.
know? So if you control sugar with lifestyle, it's going to be way better than any drug you can use to control the sugar. There's no question about that. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to eat whatever I want. And, it's kind of like, it's like a church that says you could be a jerk to everyone and we'll forgive you every week. Okay. You pay us $30 and we'll forgive you. Okay. It doesn't work that way. You gotta really live that life, and I think that's the important thing.
Yeah. Brian, how do you deal with the social media pressure? You are on Twitter, you are elsewhere as well. And both of you, Dr. True and you are just East and West, very contrasting personalities. But I would also like to think that you balance each other out. But you as a person, how do you deal with the social media? Because I think there's a lot of information download that you don't want. People are holding up a lot inside them, and they went it out on social media. And besides the information, you are forced to kind of, take all that, other people's mental vomit, I would say. I know for a fact that Ben Bickman hates the social media, especially, people kind of dishing out useless information, or random information, I would say, that is of no use to me. How do you deal with that pressure? How do you use the social media as a tool? Do you think it's a boon or a bane? What's the value of social media for you?
Yeah, I think the value of social media is I learn a lot. I see people saying, here's a study that came out. Let me look at that study. Is it true or not true? And so there's a lot to that. Of course, Tro and I have different personalities, and we need different personalities, and we do complement each other that way. And behind the scenes, we get along great. And, I've been a mentor to him, and there's certain areas he's been a mentor to me, but saying, hey, look, Tro, you don't have to win every fight. Don't let the ego get a hold. I think we get the ego a hold. So usually when I tweet, I don't look back to what the responses are, unless it's people I know or people in the community, or one of my friends will respond to someone, and then I might go and look. Because what I found is the negative people, like you think about, I think about, what are these people like in life? So if you say something bad about me and I can come and go, hey, why do you have that opinion? We can talk about it. But
Mm,
if you don't want to say why, and so people get in these arguments, prove this, prove this, prove this, and you can't prove it. I mean, I'm not going to sit there all day and argue with one person. But I think as a matter of fact, with the atheist thing, and when this guy was attacking me, I tried to say, hey, look, here's what I believe. And then he got nasty with me kind of. And I go, this is a guy I can't really deal with. So I'm never going to convince you that if you believe I'm wrong, no matter what, why am I going to try to defend my point? It's not going to have any. So I've learned that over the years. Like, if you're strong against what I believe, then I'm not really probably going to be. But if you go, hey, Brian, what is it? I'm curious. Like, tell me about. Then I love people like that. Like, why do you
mm,
believe this crazy stuff? Here's what I believe. Here's what I've seen. Here's what my life experience is. And I can explain it. But
mm,
on social media, you can't really do that. So that's why I like the podcast format, because if you hear someone talk for an hour, you can't really take it out of context. That's why Joe Rogan does such a great job, because you could say, well, this guy's crazy. And you listen and go, oh,
mm,
that's what he's basing his opinion on. I
mm,
get it. Okay. So I think that, and what you're doing, right? You can hear me, and like people may not like me, or they may like me, or they may listen to me and go, I don't like his approach on this. That's okay. We don't have to be right on. No one's right on. I don't know anyone who's right on everything, including myself. I disagree with myself. In 6 months, I may disagree with things that I said before. Even on life's best medicine, I love it because I had Ben Bigman on again. I've had several people on twice, and they're like, I don't even know what I said last time, but here's life's best medicine, because life's best medicine for you can change. At some point in your life, it may be religion. At some point, it may be nutrition. At some point, it may be your friends. And so I think it's so important that we have to look and go, really, ultimately, what really matters in life, and,
Yeah.
and so for me, I know the effects of getting angry and stressed. So I was like, why would I argue with someone who's never going to come to my point of view and get worked up and upset that one person doesn't agree with me? So we'll cancel each other out when we vote. No big deal, right? It's okay. So I think it's that you have to get to that point where you go, okay. And I think also when you're secure in what you're saying and you have data and you're not just making up stuff, then you're not offended by having a discussion with people. That's why it's so dangerous in medicine. Medicine does not change until people say, wait, what we're doing doesn't make sense. It's not working. Like Jason Fung, someone comes along and goes, you're just putting people on huge doses of insulin. Don't you know insulin has a problem? And the more insulin you take, the higher your mortality, the more cancer, the more all these things. Why don't we change that? Right.
Mm.
And when you need someone to say, yeah, you're right. I never thought about that way. If no one does that, then he's just talking to the wall, and he did for a lot of years. But it's that persistent and be able. So for me, I don't take offense to social media because I go, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm not going to argue with you. But the point is, for instance, when I had the debate with the atheist guy who was he was nasty in his opinion, not like just saying, hey, why do you believe what you believe? It was not where you can have a reasonable discussion. But people reached out to me and said, Brian, the way you handled that really made me think about what you're saying is true. And so it's the people who are watching the discussion. So that's why I don't want to compromise. Like if you and I don't agree on whether you eat meat or not, I'm not going to say, well, you're a jerk and you're divorced twice, right? It's like that has nothing to do with the argument. So what happens is people get into these. That's what happened with Tro. Him and this guy get into personal attacks with each other. It's like, well, that's not. Everyone's like, okay, this isn't. I'm not learning anything from this. All I'm learning is that you guys are being jerks to each other. So I think there's that where you try to keep it on a professional level and go, okay, we have a difference of opinion. Let's present my data. You present yours, and let the people decide. So I don't believe in, even if someone's totally wrong, I don't believe in suppressing what they're saying. But if you say, okay, here's what he's saying, but here's what reality shows. So
Mm.
all the time I see doctors and they're saying stuff that is so insane, and you go, how can you possibly believe that? You see patients, right? And you know that doesn't work. And so I think that's what happens. And just realizing, all these, being in medicine for so long, I've seen all these miracle drugs come out that it's going to save the world, and it turns into a total disaster. So that's why I say, well, let's be hesitant a little bit and see what the results are, not just what the person selling it. Like if I buy a car, I don't just listen to what the salesman tells me. I go, hey, you have that car. How's it working for you? Right? You talk to other people who drive that car and go, do you like your car? Would you get it again? And then you can make a decision. But when you listen to just one person who has all bias and selling you that expensive car, you need to hear the whole story of what happens in down the road, right? So I think it's really, social media is a beautiful thing. And people like Ben Bikman, who's the expert in his area, and people argue with him. He goes, look, I got the data, I got the studies with, if you have super low insulin, you can take in 5,000 calories a day and you don't gain weight. Type 1 diabetics cannot gain weight without insulin. They'll die. And then they'll still argue the point. And he goes, here's all my studies. And so the thing is, someone like Ben is doing so much good work. And when I saw his data, I go, I can use that clinically. And so every day I use his work to explain things to my patient. Jason Fung, Tro, all these people that I can use little things of what they taught me so I can help my patient. Because ultimately that's what it's about. It's not about ego. If I'm wrong, like Professor Noakes, he changed his tune on carbs. He was a carb loading guy. Now you don't. And so someone like that who can say, I've reassessed, I've looked at the results, what I told you before doesn't work. That's someone I can follow and respect. Because if you stick to this thing all over and over, and there's study after study saying you're wrong, you got to at some point go, I was wrong. I got to change my tact. And in medicine, it's hard because of egos.
Brian, where do you see yourself maybe 5 years or 10 years down the line when you probably may not be actively involved in your clinic, or you want to do something else besides what you're doing? What's the plan? What's
Yeah,
the journey like?
Yeah, I think the more I'm around, I love the patient interactions. I can see myself doing a little bit more online stuff. A lot of people like to do online and help people that are maybe don't have access to a doctor or out in remote areas. I love that. I love giving talks and just going to a church or going places and just talking to people. And so I would love to do something like that. I would really love to do like corporate health and say, okay, look, company, we can help your work staff to be more presentable, to be healthier, to get them off insulin. And I've done it before, and I had so much satisfaction doing that because I could sit with 30 people at one time and help them all at one time, say the same thing to 30 people instead of one at a time. So those kind of things where we can have that kind of reach, I'd love to come to India someday and talk to people. I love to go to Guatemala, El Salvador, Vietnam, and talk to people, and you learn from them. I was just in Guatemala, as an example. We're in this remote area in the middle of nowhere. And this guy's explaining and he's simple. This guy doesn't read or anything. He's a simple farmer, right? And so we start talking. He has diabetes, and he's telling me about, oh yeah, my eyes get really blurry, and I go to the bathroom a lot, and my feet burn. He's explaining diabetes, retinopathy, and he's explaining all these diabetes complications with severely elevated sugars. And I said, so what? You're out here. What do you have access to? And he said, yeah. He said, well, my wife makes me this tea with these 3 leaves, and she heats it, and I go, oh, and he goes, when I do that, my vision gets better. I feel better. I don't pee as much, and my feet don't hurt as bad. I said, really? What is it? I don't know. My wife just makes it. So I go and, and I'm in the middle of nowhere. They have no TVs, no radio, no nothing. You're in the middle of nowhere. I'm like, how this guy, what is this? And so he comes back and goes, oh, doctor, I found out it's guava leaf. I'm like, guava leaf? Oh, the guava plant. I take 3 leaves and I boil it and I drink it, and it helps. But I stopped doing it, and then I got worse. I'm like, okay. So I go home to my hotel and I start Googling and looking it up, and I'm like, holy cow, National Institute of Health, all these people have done studies saying that guava leaf extract helps with diabetes. I'm like, this guy's not crazy. They figured it out. So there's a lot in India, there's a lot of natural remedies that work, that help people. And you go, why is it that we don't do those things? Well, because no one can make money off of it, right? If you could just go pick off 3 leaves off your tree and boil it and drink it, you're not buying the newest diabetes drug that's on the market, So there's so much like that where the simple people seem to, and that's the thing I would say is a life lesson too, is that there's simple people that they get life. Like I've went fishing with a little fishing guy, and the guy was so wise in life, and you talk to him and go, wow, this guy gets what matters, right? In Guatemala, El Salvador, I see that the kids play, they get together. Just something was posted yesterday. I brought the soccer balls, that would bring soccer balls to Guatemala, and these kids and you see it in India too. They have a can, and they put tape around it, and they're using that to play soccer. Yes. And you give them a real soccer ball, and these kids are so happy, and like their life is so great, and they appreciate it all. And so that was a huge life lesson. It's like, wow, they appreciate it, and they're like help each other, and there's so many experiences like that I've had doing volunteer work where I get all the gifts. You know what I mean? I get the reward. It's not that I go there to help people, but I get rewarded. So I've been to Cuba. I've been to see people who are really poor off, but I see them be happy. I'm like, okay, if this guy could be happy in his situation, then I could probably be happy in my air-conditioned office all day. You know what I mean? When you start putting it in perspective, and I think that's so important. That's when you ask why I'm happy, because I realize, I just saw a kid yesterday, 29 years old with metastatic rectal cancer, all over his body. He's not thinking about, oh, what kind of car should I be driving? Or can I have this game? Like he's thinking about survival and how do I not throw up all day? When you're seeing, you go, oh my gosh. And we've seen those things. And when you see it, it changes you. It either makes you callous and you don't care anymore, or it brings out your humanity. It depends on the person. Because being around suffering, it's so hard. In India, there's so much suffering in different places. In the United States, you can go to places and see suffering. And it's like, and I think that's the point is people say, I've been asked before, how do you go on these medical trips? And there's so many sick people and you can't help them all. I said, well, I can help the ones I can help. The ones that come to me, the ones who want to listen, and it's the same thing in my clinic here. There's some people I go, I can't help you. Because if you're bitter and angry and hate the world and all these things, you're not going to benefit. You got to change that part of your life. Because if every time you get into a fight with someone, you want to eat cookies, you got to stop fighting with people, right? And enjoy life and go get a massage and go for a hike. Find your passion in life and do it. Do what you enjoy doing. Because medicine got to the point for me, I go, I could walk away from this. If you would have asked me 6 years ago, would you leave medicine? It was in my radar. I go, I'll find a way. I just have to support my family somehow, right? And then I realized during the last couple of years, if the governing bodies decide they don't like what you're saying and they take your license, would you still speak out? And I say, yeah, I would, because of Professor Noakes and Gary Fettke. Those people gave me courage to say they did it. Why would I back down from what I know is the truth? So when you see the truth, you go, I can't do anything else. But other people just don't see the truth and they think you're crazy, right? It's a hard thing.
I think as you said, you are now moving to Arizona and coming back and forth. And I think a lot of community opportunities would be there through your app and, even otherwise with Dr. Tro and even independently. I think that's the larger role that you would be playing now instead of one-on-one. Maybe the community angle would be coming in.
Yeah. And that's something I learned too over life. Like at my old practice, I thought, you know what? I had this sense of responsibility, because I said, if I leave this practice, what's going to happen to all my patients? But guess what? They just bring in another doctor and they go, oh yeah, don't worry about insulin, all this stuff. So the patients aren't going to get the same kind of care, but the people who really want that kind of care are going to follow you, right? The
Mm.
one who really appreciate that, you're going to go. Like if I have a trainer and I'm getting good results, if he moves, I'm going to try to move with him if possible, or she moves, right? And so I think there's ultimately you can't fake caring about people and being invested in them. I just had a patient yesterday and I thought, oh, that's a nice compliment. But, I told her, I said, look, we medically, you're doing great. We've got you on the right track. And, I think you don't need to follow up with me as frequently. And her
Mm.
husband was in the back and he goes, doctor, she's going to see you every week because you're her life coach. After she sees you, she has a positive attitude. She sticks on programs. She's doing all this stuff. She goes, I know her. This isn't what she's going to do. If she doesn't have you in her life, she's going to struggle and it's going to be. And I was like, wow, that's kind of nice. As I'm her life coach now, not her doctor of saying we got to adjust the meds and we got to do it because we got her at a good spot now. But I think when you realize someone's helping you, then it's worth it. And that's something I
Brings so
really.
much of meaning to your life. I mean, being a doctor to being a life coach, you're inspiring so many people. That's commendable, Brian.
Yeah, I think it's just, and I enjoy it. And I get paid by that. That's how I get paid. Like people are appreciative and happy, and they're laughing now, and we're just talking about their grandkids now, not talking about their knee pain, or how depressed they are. And when people are like, as a doctor, I'm telling you, when you see someone get back into life and enjoying life and saying, "Hey, I went for a hike last week," when 2 years ago they couldn't get out of bed, you go, "Wow, that's amazing!" Like you're seeing life and you're living. And I think so many people. One of the questions I ask people on their first visit, and I would say 95% of people like sit back and go, why are you asking that? But I'll say, what do you do for fun? What do you enjoy? And so many people will just stare at me and go, fun?
Yeah,
I'm
don't know.
surviving.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know, you got to find your passion. That's why like people go, you love what you do and you're smiling all because I have my passion. I love what I do. I can help people. I'm investing in lives and I can see lives change. And I think with your question of saying what would I do down the road, I have a physician assistant who joined me who's out. I look at her and she's like super kind, super nice, very engaged with people. I was like, it doesn't have to be me. It doesn't have to be me. It's the message, right? It doesn't have to be Jason Fung. It has to be people who understand how to help people and are invested in helping people. Man, it's amazing to build a team around it. And I have a team like that here. It's just amazing. Everyone's investing. Go, hey, have you thought about this, doc? This person having this problem. I know about mold toxicity. Can I help them? And when you have a team that can everyone like as you know, like there's certain areas of expertise that I just don't have. So I was
Mm.
like, oh, hormone replacement, that's not my, but she's great at that. So she can help you. Let's try tweaking that and see what happens. And as long as the patient gets better, I think I would tell people out there as advice, if your doctor is upset or gets offended that you get a second opinion on something, find a new doctor. Because if you're confident in what you're doing and you want to help the patient, you go, hey, if someone can help you, let's try that. If you need counseling, let's get you to the counselor. Because sometimes you need different eyes and different people who can say, this is the root cause of the problem. Why are you eating cookies every night? Why is
Mm.
that? Why is that you need the cookies, right? Why is it you can't live without it? And so I think those deeper questions of saying, yeah, I'm not happy with my job. I'm in a bad relationship. I'm fighting with my husband every day. Say, okay, can we fix that? Can we work on that? And so I've seen it so many times where people get their personal life in order because they could be great at work. There's a lot of people who are the greatest people at work and at home they're a jerk to everyone, right? You can be
Mm.
very successful, but that doesn't mean you're going to be happy. And that's one thing I will tell you about the low carb community. I can tell you with definitive answer is these people. You look at the Fetkes, you look at the Noakes, you look at Jason Fleming. All these people are successful in their personal life too, and their relationships at home, and they're happy and they're kind. Tro is a great father with his kids and his wife. He's very dedicated, and he does so many good things in the community. And you go, okay, people just don't know that how
Mm.
people are behind the scenes. Like Sean Baker has a great story, and he's done a lot of great things. He may get in people's faces, but you look at what he does, and as a person of integrity, man, he has a lot of integrity. Ken Berry, like all these people, you go, okay, they're decent human beings. Like you could sit down. Ben Bickman, oh my gosh, you want him as your neighbor, of course. Like he is the
Heard
nicest
that,
person,
heard that, heard that. Totally.
and you can see that. You can't fake that. I mean, but there's a lot of people who have all these publications. You talk to them for a few minutes and go, this is not someone I want to follow. They might
Mm.
know science, but they're not very nice to people. Like, that's what it really is. And someone posted, I saw something today that said that you're never so important that you can stop being nice to people. Right. And I think that's a good lesson for us because sometimes we get so caught up in what we're doing and, you're all that and you don't have to be nice to people anymore. Well, that's going to come back in. You call it karma or the golden rule, whatever you want to. It comes back and gets you.
Yeah, I think that's how it is. The universe is on a boomerang. That's what I believe in. And that's pretty much what the science says in terms of vibration and energy. And I think the larger context of everything that you said is creating that value to your life, adding more energy, positivity to your life, so that it eventually gets on to everybody, and maybe they can take a look, maybe stop somewhere down the road and see where they're headed, and probably change course.
Yeah,
Right?
take a breath, right? And take a breath and go, okay, just breathe. I have people all the time like, just breathe for a second because they're talking so fast, and I could tell they're gonna have struggles because they got 3 kids, and I got to be here, and I got this, I got, and it's like relax, because being stressed and tense and worried all the time raises your insulin, your cortisol, and all that stuff. And that's why I don't engage with people who are toxic online. And having forgiveness for people in your family is really important. But if they're toxic to you, you go, okay, I'm going to forgive them and not hold it against them, but I'm not going to hang out with them every weekend if they stress me out. So there's things like that where you kind of just have to take a breath. And I'm telling you, I could see it when people come in. I'm like, oh, it's going to be a struggle because you're not sleeping, you're stressed, you're tense. All those things are going to raise your insulin just as much as eating a cookie. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
all those things, you go, okay, just slow down a little bit. Let's reassess your job. If you're stressed and you throw up every Sunday night because you have to go to work Monday morning, like what can we do different? And I think there's such a fear that people won't change. And my atheist friend, the same thing. When we talking, he said, Brian, you encouraged me to leave my old job where I was making good money, all that, to go on my own and do it. He was the best thing I've ever done. But it was scary. I said, well, you're more courageous than me because I have faith when I do that. You're doing it on your own. And that's even more scary for me. Like, I know I can't handle all this stuff. So, I think we all handle life what works. And that's what works for him. I'm like, that's cool if it works for you. And then I was teasing him. I said, God opened those doors, right? But you're just taking credit for it. And he laughed because we're friends, and I could say that, right? So things like that where you kind of, we all have our own different perspectives. And I think just really sitting back and saying, okay, let me just reassess. Is this an evil person? Because there's people I don't agree with them on certain things, but I may agree with them on politics. Okay, let's gravitate towards that, and we'll talk about that where we can kind of learn from each other. So I think that's the take home message I would say is like, okay, have some grace for yourself, have some grace for other people. Understand we're all flawed. None of us are perfect. And that's why no one could throw that first stone. Because I say, yeah, I've got some, but that, and the other thing on social media that I've noticed that really is horrific is that it's like a pack of wolves. Sometimes someone gets hurt or says something dumb, and everyone attacks them at one time instead of saying, hey, you said the wrong thing, like whatever. It happens, we all do it. Next week might be my week. So you kind of have compassion for people when they say something that's out of line or they don't think and they type something. That's why I have my wife, she'll look at my tone, she'll don't tweet that. Don't do that, because people aren't going to get your joke. Because my humor, a lot of people don't get it when I'm joking. They think I'm serious. So I tease Doctor, because we know each other, so I could tease someone, but other people may take, like Tro and I, when we started the podcast, we would tease each other, but it was all in jest. We get along. We're not like, but we would tease each other about talking too much or this or whatever it is. And, so people took offense to that on my side or his side. And, and so, I think it's just going through life. You kind of just have to balance it out and, really not try to, people who know me know I'm not going to try to go out and harm someone or hurt their reputation for no reason. I'm going to try to be reasonable. I may disagree with you on something, but if I do, it'll be behind the scenes and I'll text you and we'll talk about it. I'm not going to just go online and say, you're an idiot. You have no idea what you're talking about. So, I think all of us are trying to do that and bring more positivity. And, what you all are doing is amazing. It's amazing how many lives you can impact. It's incredible. When I see the statistics in India, it's heartbreaking because I know they're good people and they're struggling and they just don't know any better.
Yeah, yeah. So trying to create as much awareness as possible. I think Metabolic Health Conference, of which you were also a part, did a lot for the Indian, metabolic health scenario, and it's been widely acclaimed. And I think we did good. And another one is in the pipeline, maybe at 24. The first quarter of that, maybe in April sometime. That's what the plan is.
Yeah, no, you're doing great stuff. I'm excited about everything you have going.
Yeah. So thank you, Brian. It's been a wonderful conversation with you, the man, Brian, that we didn't know so much about. Brian, you are one of those people who's approachable, accessible on the social media. You really make people believe in the simplicity of life through your podcast, through your conduct on the social media, the passion that you work around with, and trying to make life happen or make life better for people, than just letting things pass by. I would really call you a kind of the torch bearer, one of the torch bearers of the ideal um, behavior or conduct on social media and the torchbearer also of low carb and also of instilling positivity in people. So very inspirational, Brian. I would leave people with Brian's podcast lines, which are very inspiring, which he I think has recorded in his own voice, and it goes like this: Welcome to Life's Best Medicine podcast, where we are finding hope and healing, one episode at a time. No appointments needed, no rubber gloves, and no coping. Just a healthy dose of life's lessons to equip you with this wild journey we call life. There's such a person I would love to call salt of the earth, Brian. Thank you very much for being on the podcast with me.
Oh, thank you so much. And I feel the same about you all. And I appreciate the opportunity to come out. And, I love what you're doing and I'm excited about the future for you. And it's an honor to be a part of it. So I appreciate you. And talking about these other things too, because a lot of times people don't want to talk about these, just talking about nutrition. But, we all have to look at that. Like Ben Bickman talks about these 5 things, life, stress, and sleep, and, processed food and exercise, and not drinking to excess, and not smoking and not smoking. And so you start realizing it's not that complicated, like which of these things can tweak? I'm not doing well at 2 of them. Maybe I can change those. So I think, I never see anyone, and this would be my take home for people. I've never had a patient who said, when I was stressed out and tense and fighting with everyone, I felt great. As soon as I started having peace, I felt horrible. Like no one says that. People are doing great, then they go through a divorce or life hits. And so finding what your foundation is, because all of our foundations have been rocks, things we believe to be true or were not true, and things that we thought we could lean on, we couldn't lean on, and so realizing what matters. And I think for all of us, that's the question. And what matters today may be different tomorrow, but I think just really having that motivation in life, saying what really is important. Because if it's not important for you to lose weight, you're probably not going to. But if it's your priority, you're probably going to do well. If you stand one day at a time and all those things, or to be a better person or whatever it is, just make ourselves better. And we can't change where we are now. Right now, today, we have to accept ourselves where we're at, but say, okay, I want to be better tomorrow. And I think that's something we can be as human beings, and being decent to each other and everything. So, but thank you for the opportunity to speak. I really appreciate the time.
We'd love to have you back, Brian, the next time with something else,
we could fight next time. We could fight next time and make it exciting for people.
Yeah, we could do that. You can bet on that. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we can stop the recording here, and then she can come online.